Now, around about 7 or 8 months ago, I welcomed to the Neil Wilkins podcast for the first time somebody called Victoria Pelletier. Now, Victoria was and still is actually one of the most popular guests on the podcast. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome her back because, and this is a big, big announcement, there's a new book. Victoria has been described as unstoppable. And between then and now, clearly has been unstoppable because there's a whole bunch of new stuff going on, which I'm hoping we're going to delve into. Welcome back, Victoria.
Thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So what has been going on? I mean, it was back in January that we first caught up and spoke about, I think it was women in leadership we focused on for the topic that we were talking about then. I guess a lot of water has passed under your bridge since then because you've got a book and I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff going on as well.
Yeah, this past year has flown by with a crazy amount of activity. I think around the time we were speaking, I had my first book of the year. This will be the second one that came out. And that one was around personal branding. And then this newest one, I've also done a ton of public speaking and some consulting and had been invited to be the opening speaker at TEDx in Miami. So that was pretty cool.
Nice. And what was the topic for TEDx Miami?
The theme of the entire event was around resilience. And so I spoke on what I refer to as healthy resilience.
And for anybody listening to Victoria here for the first time, if you missed the previous conversation that we had, I will put into the show notes, I will put a link to that because it was fascinating. I mean, we touched on so many things. I mean, it was titled Women in Leadership, but we went to so many different areas, culture, purpose, deep diving into how to, sort of be a better leader, a whole host of things, as well as obviously, touching on your journey, which was, I think, for a lot of people, quite a profound understanding that, despite, some real kind of challenging life moments, you've come through and flourished. And I think for a lot of people, that's been such an inspiration. Has that kind of really played out, I guess, in lots of the speaking that you've done? And I'm guessing it comes through in the book as well.
It does. I share that, the horrible backstory and early years that I experienced is a big part of my why. What has fueled me to be as driven as I am, the fact that I determined I'd be better than either the biology of the family I was born into or subsequently the circumstances of my adoptive family. So it comes out in everything that I do. And some of the parts around resilience and my own need to develop, as I said, healthy resilience. And by that, I just mean, I think a lot of people can deal with a lot, but end up not processing a lot of the trauma or adversity. And so instead bottling it up or just putting it to the side, which I think erupts for many at some point. And so learning how to do that in a very healthy manner and giving myself permission to fail as I go forward. And how do I then deal with that? You'll see that in who I am as a leader, who I am as a human, trying to impart that on my own humans that I've given birth to as well.
Yeah, it's a real journey, isn't it? I think the thing I took away from our last conversation was just this whole concept that you're kind of on this journey and it never stops. That it's not about a destination at all, is it? It's about kind of embracing the moment and living it and being curious and exploring both self and others and just kind of, just sort of embracing the change that is every day. And it's kind of infectious, isn't it? Once you kind of start doing this, it's almost like you can't unsee it or unknow it.
No, I think actually you said a word, Neil, for me around change, and the other being curiosity. And for me, that's just, it is really innately in who I am and how I choose to live life. As much as I use a phrase frequently, strategic intentionality. So as much as I am strategic about goals, objectives, and planning for myself and being really intentional around the steps to get there, at the same time, I give myself free rein to sometimes go with the flow because you don't know where it's going to take you. And a lot of what I've done, not only changes in my personal life and circumstances, even from a career standpoint, I have been a part of or supported 40 merger and acquisition transactions or related transactions. Those all come with significant change and transformation. So as a result of going through that, which excites me. I feel like I'm now the type of person who will break stuff just to put it together again, or seek out roles and opportunities where I know I get to step in and like transform.
So here's a profound question then, because if there's part of this is obviously planful and strategic and just proper serious kind of business, and then you talk also then almost in equal measure about that opportunity to just trust and go with the intuition. How do you know when to go with either option? Because they feel like poles apart.
Uh, they are. And sometimes I've made some of those gut or intuition based decisions founded upon as much fact as I could uncover in advance of it. And every once in a while, they've been wrong. But my philosophy is around no regrets and using that as the learning opportunity for me for future. And so I don't know what that magic formula is in terms of what percentage is like strategic and intentional and what is, more flowing and intuition. I think you sort of figure out what feels right, but I always try and leverage again like past experiences and learnings to help inform and make decisions as I then go forward.
So it takes time then, I'm guessing, is because it's almost like you can't just wake up one morning and think, hey, I'm going to do what Victoria says, and then I'll just kind of know it and I'll make those decisions. It's almost like you have to live it and breathe it and make those fails, because the fails, obviously, as we know, we learn more from failure than we do from success, because we then have to do that deep soul searching as to the why. So is it a matter of time? Is it just that if we're in the game longer, we stand more of a chance of ultimately kind of winning, however we define it?
I definitely think that helps. But I think of my first, and I might have shared it when we spoke last time, my first executive role came at age 24. I was a brand new mother and I was stepping into a very new, not just role. I had a deep operational background and I was stepping in to lead almost all parts of the company that I stepped in as COO and GM of a company and led everything except for finance. Huge risk for me to take. I was also leaving safety and security, to the extent that there is, in the workforce of a job I'd been in for many months. I was 24, so I didn't have the age and wisdom that I now have at age 48. But I was comfortable stepping into my discomfort zone. So I will say I absolutely think that knowledge, wisdom, and time helps. But I also think that opportunity and growth comes when you step into the place of discomfort and the things that you fear.
Mm. So I'm kind of getting a sense here, and I know I've got the luxury of kind of obviously knowing a little bit from the previous conversation here, but I'm getting a sense here that there are so many ingredients that go into making a success of this. Because I mean, as we said at the start of this conversation, we could take this conversation in so many different directions, because you have so many multiple facets and angles and perspectives and directions that you come from. So I guess this whole idea of the power of whole human, which is very much the essence of the new book, is that there are so many ingredients in this recipe, aren't there? So if it is from failure, if it is from experience, if it is from planning, if it is from intuition, it is from culture, it's relationships, communication, the list is almost endless. It is about just, I guess, being very awake and very aware of how those things interplay and interact. And so you've kind of got to be awake and alert to be able to even sense what's going on, haven't you?
You do. I think you need to have a great deal of empathy, and yes, awareness of self and of others. And I think that recognition, that awareness, going back to a prior word, curiosity of others, I think that is what creates a strong leader, human, but in the context in which certainly in the book I've written and in my role in business as a leader.
So let's explore this whole human thing then, because that's a big, big title, isn't it? I mean, the whole human. I mean, my goodness, there are so many facets within that. Were there any sort of particular areas then, as you were kind of constructing the book before you sort of started writing it, where you thought whole human, yes, but actually there are some priorities here to get people to focus on?
I decided, Neil, to write the book because one, I've evolved significantly as a leader. The command and control style that I entered into the workforce of and saw all around me, I had a lack of real mentors of like leaders that I aspired to be like. Instead, it was ones that I decided to be nothing like. So a combination of that to seeing the evolution of the workforce and um, the drive towards purpose and alignment for values, and also working for the kind of leader that you know that you can trust, and that has your back. So for me, whole human is all of those things, and recognizing we can't park our lived experiences, the culture, and other things that have been bestowed upon us by family or geography potentially when we walk into the workplace. And so I believe it's incumbent upon us as the leader to uncover some of those things. There's lots of, and particularly in our world with like these beautiful filters we can all put on our social media posts, there's so much more behind those. And so I encourage people to be their authentic selves as they show up, but also as a leader, pulling that out of people as well, I think is really important. And doing that doesn't mean that there's a trade-off for strong business performance. I actually think one drives the other. And so for me, going back to prioritization, some of the traits I would talk about in being a leader are being empathetic. I think there's an incredible amount of vulnerability that needs to come. And again, that's what builds trust with team members who then will follow you into the proverbial fire. You said the word communication, a great deal of not just being authentic in how we communicate, but as being as transparent as possible. And I refer to the unseen employee. And so again, that's our role to pull out information and the desires and wants of our team, but also the richness that comes from diversity on all facets. And how do you build a team founded on all of that the diverse elements, I think is critical as well.
So I'm curious. I'm going to take the role of somebody listening to this who aspires and maybe thinks they're kind of ready to move from maybe an operational role into something a little bit more of a leadership kind of role. Would it be, I mean, which is the better, if there is one, better kind of starting point? Do you kind of lock yourself away in a darkened room or go up a mountain to kind of figure out who you are and how you're going to do it? Or do you step into the role, interact with others, and then kind of almost figure it out on the field of play in terms of the reactions that you get from others?
I think you just need to dive head in. You are, much to our just recent conversation around failure and what you learn from that, you're trial and error. You're going to figure out what works. My first leadership role was at 14. Like, what the heck does a 14-year-old really know? Like, if I'd locked myself away, I wouldn't be, until I learned all of those things. And I haven't learned them all. We are, as you said, on a journey. Then I think we won't achieve as much, as we could potentially. So I'd tell your listeners to step in, try and inform yourself as much as possible, listening to podcasts like this, reading books, hearing from others who have been there, done that, hear from their failures, but don't be afraid. Going back to my point over like step into something that is unknown, creates discomfort for you, and learn from others. But I also think that putting your hand up to say, I don't know what I don't know, is really important. And even as a leader, as much as you want to instill confidence, again, I think what that builds and how much you rely upon and respect others who have complementary skills, again, is incredibly powerful.
There's something nice about that, because if you're being led by somebody who says, look, I don't really get that bit. You're the specialist. I give you almost permission to guide me. I'm the leader, but you guide me because you're the specialist in that area. You come back with the evidence. We'll have a conversation. Yeah, that kind of just feels such an interactive, collaborative way of leading, doesn't it? Rather than I am the expert in absolutely everything. There's nothing you can't teach me. I'm the leader. I mean, that just feels so fake, and it's just impossible, isn't it? So much better with collaboration, surely.
It is. It is. And in the age where, I mean, things are constantly changing and we're needing to shift gears and pivot for whatever reason, the world conditions and market conditions to just whatever's happening in the company, getting people on the proverbial bus by having built that kind of open relationship to have that kind of conversation. That's where I found like I've led people into positions that were unknown for all of us, but they trusted me to do that. And I think a lot of that came from, saying at some point, and by the way, I had to pivot my own leadership style because I wasn't always operating this whole human leadership approach. But having the conversation with people has brought them, to follow me into places of unknown and unrest, quite frankly.
Mm. Yeah, and it is exciting, isn't it, really? I mean, if you're going there as a team, some of us are kind of solo practitioners or lone wolves, however you want to kind of describe it, but there is something kind of really motivating and inspiring about actually doing it as a collaborative, doing it as a team, and kind of feeling part of something bigger, because surely with that you're going to be uncovering the innovations and the new stuff that you can't see from your own perspective, because even if you are a very kind of open person, you're still viewing things with your own lens and your own baggage, aren't you? So the collaboration part here has to be significant in that whole human concept, doesn't it?
Very much so. It does. Now, one caveat to that, at some point, I'll say there's a hierarchy for a reason. So I always try and bring people, to the right spot on the bus. I'd hate to have them ask them to exit, but in some cases you do. And that's because you want people to collaborate with one another. I spent a lot of time, in professional services and think technology and change, and we're working through what are referred to as personas, but that's the understanding of the individual and the what's in it for me, for them personally, and so then if you can identify what that is, and to your point over like the lens that I have is very different from someone else's, to bring all those to the table to then ideally find a solution that works for all, is the best path forward. There are times, however, where it's been insurmountable for some who are so resistant to change that then there's some tough decisions that need to be made.
So that whole kind of reception to change, being receptive to, just the reality of modern world, which is it's changing whether you like it or not. Are there some other kind of, I guess, ingredients in our recipe here that, receptive to change? Are there other kind of things on that checklist that makes, somebody who is moving into a leadership role, makes it easier for them to identify people that you'd want to kind of bring into your team? Are there some kind of common sort of facets and links?
The propensity to learn is a big one. And so this is where I'll often coach other leaders to open the aperture a little bit when they're looking at hiring, not only for diversity. So I want people that come with very different backgrounds, maybe from, different countries, different job functions, different industries. Again, all elements of diversity is one, but then two, each role has, a defined job description with skills or criteria that are listed. I want leaders to be comfortable finding people that don't have 100% of those. Maybe they only have 7 out of 10 of the skills that you've listed, but their propensity to learn, to me, gets much more significant weighting than having 10 out of 10 of the requisite skills that we have listed. But what it's incumbent upon the leader then to help bridge the gap. So whether that's them personally coaching and developing for that skill gap, or identifying others who can do that, or education, et cetera. That's a tremendous one for me, particularly now I have a talk called The Future of Work, but I sort of rebranded it like The Future is Now. Like we can't stop. We need to stop talking about the future because it's here. Not only where we work has changed, but how we're working, and the shelf life of skills has reduced dramatically now to an average of less than 2 years. So we have to constantly be evolving and learning how to keep ourselves relevant for, again, the fast evolution of our roles in business, but also connecting that to the type of work that people want to be doing. Because what gets left behind as we automate things now is very, very different. And so again, sometimes I feel like the role is a little bit of as a therapist as much as it is as their coach and leader in business.
Are you seeing kind of this fear come into play with this whole automation thing? I mean, a lot of people are talking about, oh, because of the role I have, it's very operational. It is very process driven. Therefore, I can be an AI, so you don't need the human. Are you kind of seeing this play out in reality?
I am. There is a great amount of fear. What I'm actually seeing is right now, I mean, companies are trying to figure out where to implement AI and just broad automation in the business, and how to do it responsibly, and how to orchestrate that across. And a lot of my career has been in leading like global organizations, and so they're very disparate, not only in geographic locations, but the federated model of some of them. And so how do you orchestrate that across? So that's just a fear at like the macro organizational level, down to at an individual. Yes, if you are in more of the front line or more of the administrative type of roles or much more routine, everyone's fearful right now of what is this going to look like for me, even down to, I think, some professional services of lawyers. So for example, there's amazing technology now that can scan through dozens and hundreds and thousands of documents to help create drafts of materials or do things that they might have, racked up 100 billable hours for. And so even like, for these professionals who've gone, to school for many, many years are fearing that. Instead, I think it's about shifting the mindset over the work that gets, I refer to it as the work that gets left behind. There's still going to need to be an incredible amount of like intuition and emotion. What gets left behind is the exception management. And so normally that's dealing with customers. And so a very different, type of like skill. I don't like to refer to them as soft skills, but skill that we need to be, looking towards innovation and problem solving. I'm hoping for most that drives them and gets them excited about going into work every day versus performing the same task 100 times.
That feels just the way you said it, and that was quite impassioned the way you described that, Victoria. Because but it's so important, isn't it? Because I think for a lot of us, we're trying to figure out how is this going to look this time next year, 2 years time, 5 years time. I know there is no playbook, so none of us actually really know. But to give us a level of confidence that, hey, I can bring out my intuition, I can bring out some of those things that maybe I use in my personal life, but actually I can bring those to bear now professionally, and they're going to become important. I used the word vulnerability before. If that is a key ingredient in this leadership mix, now I can actually start to use it, because part of my day job has been taken away by the AI. So now I can actually be a real specialist in this area. You can come to me and I can be the shoulder to cry on, or I can be the innovation kind of, sounding board, or whatever it happens to be. There'll be a new skill set. So these will be almost new essential skills, rather than, as you said, I don't like the phrase soft skills. It just devalues them, doesn't it? These are going to be the new ways that we kind of trade for the roles that we want, aren't they?
They are, absolutely. And so I'm hopeful that people get excited by what's about to continue to not just arrive and evolve the way we work, rather than fearing it. Because, for me, it is quite exciting. I look forward to the future.
So one of the things I love about the whole concept of your book is just this idea that it's practical. There's a lot of kind of business books and kind of management books that are very kind of philosophical, and you kind of read through and you think, yeah, okay, I'm not disagreeing it. I'm kind of, yeah, okay. And then you're left at the end with like, oh, there's almost like the so what, and it's like, now I've got to go and do more research, having read the book, to find out actually how I can implement it. you're very practically driven, aren't you? You're giving actual value, chapter by chapter, of things people can actually stop, pause, reflect, and then work on to actually do something with.
I do, in a couple of different ways. And so I talk a lot about critical thinking versus the emotional intelligence, so CT and I, EI, and around each of the chapters where I break down certain topics, I pose questions to get people thinking about how they are and how they act as a leader. And I provide real life examples in there. And they're my examples. So although I've changed the names of all of the people that are, team members in these examples, but they're ones either where I had failure and I had to learn, and I share like this is what the example was, what I did and what I've learned from that and how I do things differently going forward. And sometimes an example of a success that I've had, and that I hope that I could share that as well. And so yes, Neil, I hope that when people read this, it is actionable for them, whether it's just asking themselves questions around like how am I thinking critically versus the vulnerability and emotion that comes out of this, and like hearing a bunch of different real life examples and what worked and what didn't.
And I think it's just so encouraging, isn't it? Because, none of us are perfect. And it's just great to be able to see that as we make failures, and I do on a regular basis, but as we're kind of failing in stuff, that it's okay, because Victoria's actually telling us, look, this is what happened to me. This is what I did about it. And look where I am now. It's almost that this is perfect role modeling, isn't it? Really, it's not just saying it's okay to fail and then just paying lip service to it. It's saying it's okay to fail. This is how I managed to fail, but look, I got myself out of it, and it was all good. Actually, it was better than if I hadn't failed. There's a real kind of sense of pragmatism in here as well, isn't there? Which I think is so important and missing, I think, from most authors, within business. Is that something really important to you?
It is. I think it just, as you were describing it for me, it's the importance of storytelling. Like that's what captivates people, and why they want to listen to you, and the fact that I've made it personal. So as I wrote it, although I'm aware, because in business, when I'm in front of clients all the time and we're often trying to sell things, well, you're actually buying, and in my world, it's professional services. In many cases, you're actually buying the people. And so I've learned how to story tell, but um, and it's just innate now. And so, but the people I gravitate, most to are those who make it personal, those who can make it relatable to the audience that you're engaging with, and in a way that they can bring it down, even though I might be doing something very different, sort of field or industry from someone else. They can intuitively then understand that, again, based upon the way I'm telling the story, in terms of how they can leverage that for themselves.
And it just moves us all so far beyond the whole kind of features and benefits, typical communication within business, isn't it? It's like, this is what I do. This is what you can buy. Here's the benefits of it. It's like, yeah, okay, and I can get that down the road as well, from somebody else, competitor. Where's the point of differentiation? And of course, it is always human, isn't it? That is the big USP for most organizations, is it is those people that they have. So was that kind of something that led you then into the whole purpose and profit equation there? Because I certainly see, and when I'm kind of watching people, and certainly the people who at the moment to me are the most, I guess the ones I gravitate to, or the most kind of charismatic, are the ones who've got a very, very clear purpose within the profit and the kind of the value they're bringing. They know that fundamental reason for being, the reason why they're in business, or why they're a leader, or the crusade that they're on might be environmental, for example, or something like that. They're very, very clear in their storytelling. Is that where this kind of plays out, that you almost have to have this one kind of core theme and you stick to it and you make it super clear so everybody identifies with it? Is that important?
It is. And so, yeah, you're getting to sort of the subtitle of the book, where I talk about managing modern workers with purpose and profit. And the two are not fundamentally disconnected, and that's why I was really intentional around that in the use of those words. I do think we need to gain extreme clarity on our purpose, but it is more than making money for the businesses or ourselves. So it's getting like very crystal clear on the purpose behind not just why you're doing it to make money, but like what's meaningful for you. And as a leader, that needs to be something a good leader. It needs to be something more than that. Again, around how you want to coach, how you want to develop your team. So getting, clear on what that purpose is. And as a leader, I do think we need to bring down the organizational mission and purpose down to the individual level in terms of how the work they do contributes to the overall purpose of the organization. So that mix piece around purpose. And the profit piece is far too many times. And I've been fortunate to, work in consulting organizations, working with C-suite members or boards on a lot of the time it's on like transformation and change. And there's elements of what I write about in this book around things like diversity and inclusion, or you talk about sustainability. But I feel for so many that they believe that focusing on what I believe is doing the right thing in our companies around, let's call it diversity, equity, and inclusion, or investing in talent development and learning, and that, again, propensity to learn and how do we grow and build our talent, that's seen as a cost center or a tick in the box. But the reality is being purpose driven and a very different kind of whole human leader. If you do those, that actually drives profitability because you have a workforce who's got clarity on how success is measured and how they contribute to that. They're ideally sitting in the right role to contribute to that. And because you're the right kind of leader, they're more engaged. They stay longer, they perform higher. So you ultimately end up delivering both top and bottom line results. So purpose and profit and being a whole human leader absolutely go together. There's not a trade-off for business performance by being this empathetic, vulnerable leader.
So it feels then that it's almost quite intoxicating in terms of, enticing somebody in who shares those same values, I guess, as the leader and the organization. I mean, it makes it super simple for recruiting the right kinds of people, doesn't it? If you're telling the right stories, it's open, authentic, and honest, and it's purpose driven. Yeah, you're sustainable profitably as well. But actually what it's doing is it's kind of opening up and saying, look, these are the kinds of people we are. We're on this mission. This is where we're trying to get to. Are you that kind of person? And if you are, join us, because you'll never want to go anywhere else because you're kind of amongst friends. This is building almost like a family, isn't it? Within the purpose kind of umbrella.
It is. And I think you can sometimes mistakenly get it wrong, because I think there's lots of talk about this kind of leadership and building this kind of culture. And by the way, I believe culture is the outcome of all of these things. You can have a great mission statement on the wall around related to culture, but what comes into practice, and I've gotten it wrong, I will say. So I hire for this, and people have said the right things. My learning was to ask better questions around how they give me examples of how you dealt with these kinds of situations, and also being the kind of leader that doesn't enable or allow these kind of performers in your business. I refer to them as, your toxic top performers. You need to set the example from the top that this is not allowed. And so work them through. I'm always put someone through the appropriate performance plan to move them, to better. And that can just be how they engage and communicate with others. They might be a rock star salesperson, but they're horrible to everyone else in the company. At some point, you need to be bold enough as a leader after coaching them and not being successful to have them exit, even though they came with some really great skills and maybe brought some great numbers to the table.
And it again comes back to this whole human thing. It's almost, there's a checklist, isn't there, I guess, for most organizations and most leaders. And as long as you're kind of, as you say, learning the bits that you might have previously described as weaknesses, as long as you're attending to those, great. You're maximizing or leveraging the skill set that you've got, great. If you've got any specialist areas, even better, because then you can contribute those specific values to the team. It does feel a very practical step-by-step exercise here. Again, it kind of, you could argue it's not really rocket science, but not that many people do it, do they? Why do you think that is?
It's hard. It's hard, Neil. It sounds easy, but for many, like this is not, again, the leadership they had by example. As I said, when I entered the workforce, it was this command and control, and you can still see it in certain environments. And for others, it's uncomfortable to do some of these things. So when I said I needed to pivot, my nickname in my mid to late 20s was the Iron Maiden. I was one. I don't like the phrase imposter syndrome, but it might be a good way to describe. I was the only woman at the table. I was the youngest by a couple of decades. I wanted people to respect me. And so I wasn't going to show that I was emotional. I was not going to tell you my very difficult backstory because I didn't want anyone to go, oh my God, or feel sorry for me or any of these things. So I showed up all business, all the time, drive forward. And it wasn't until I started to let some of those walls down to be vulnerable, which did not feel comfortable. But I started to see like how the relationships and the dynamics changed. And so people don't do these things as much as it's easy. And we can write this great prescriptive, and I can write this book for some as they start to lean into some of the lessons I'm sharing with them. It doesn't feel natural, comfortable, and they fear what other people are going to think about them. That's why I think more people don't do this.
There's little moments always in this conversation where I just feel that was a little moment. That's a short, or that's a golden nugget. That's a moment that we're going to be using. And I think that is one, because that's really, really interesting, isn't it? That I think people intuitively will know if the time is right. They'll know that, okay, I'm going through what Victoria went through. Okay, imposter syndrome. Yeah, I get it. That's what I'm feeling right now. And I do pick up a lot of people still feel that, even though they might be, really experienced. They'll be in scenarios where they think, oh, I've now got to fake it until we actually get through this. It's real life, isn't it? We're not preaching here that this stuff is, okay, you buy Victoria's book and you're just going to solve all your problems. There's still hard yards. There's still work to do, isn't there?
There is. And, back to, it's a journey. And yes, age and experience help, but learning from others can dramatically help. And again, like, doing the uncomfortable will help move you forward. And we're going to evolve and shift and change over time. My nickname now is the turtle. So I am extremely resilient. I have the ability I have a high capacity and can deal with a lot, but people see the inner soft side of that turtle now versus the Iron Maiden, who had this metal exterior, super protective, and wouldn't let anyone in.
So I guess the mantra here is find your inner turtle, people. Victoria can do it from Iron Lady to turtle. I think we can all make that journey, which is amazing. I want to get this book into people's hands, Victoria. How do they best get a copy?
So it's available wherever you buy or listen to your books. So on Amazon or any of your favorite bookstores. It's also available on my website as well, at least for the hard copies. I'm an audiobook girl, so I tend to go to Spotify or Audible for that. But so my website is victoria-pelletier.com. Otherwise, The Power of Whole Human Leadership, Google that or put it in Amazon.
Wonderful. And we'll add some links into the description to make it easy for people to get hold of what is going to be, I think, one of the books of the year. I have to say, it's just the timing is absolutely right. And I thank you for holding the faith of vulnerability and purpose-driven business, because I think the world needs, as I've often said, more Victorias. So, Victoria, it's just been an absolute pleasure again to get into conversation. It's so great that you've come back on, and you must come back on for the next book, whenever that's going to be, in the hopefully not too distant future. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Neil.